You're listening to The Framework of Tomorrow, brought to you by Rally Network. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Framework of Tomorrow. I am your host, Keegan Goldfarb, and this is episode 7. Today, we will be talking about some of the biggest economic disasters that have happened in recent history. But before we get started today, I just want to talk about our sponsor here on The Framework of Tomorrow, Ashley Luann Kay. If you are interested in pursuing a higher education or insight of life as a nurse, go check out Ashley Luann Kay on Instagram at the Minnesota Nurse. Yes, go check her out at the Minnesota Nurse. She actually just got featured today, as I record this, on the New York Times. She's an amazing person. Go and check her out. One other thing before we get started today, I recently, before this episode started, I got a little disappointed. So I was looking around on the internet and I found it was a picture of a Ford Bronco from like the 70s, and I was like, dude, that is so cool. That's such a cool car. And it said it was electric, and I'm like, what? And I'm like, is that the new Ford Bronco? And it turns out it wasn't. I got fooled. It's a sweet car. Somebody actually like refurbished an original Ford Bronco from like the 70s and made it like electric. It looks amazing. Seriously, go check it out. If you're at all interested in cars, which I don't know if you are or not, but I thought it was pretty cool. You should definitely go check that out. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about some of the bigger economic disasters that have happened. Starting us off, we are going to start off with in the year of 1772. This was called the credit crisis in Europe. So this crisis originated in London and quickly spread throughout the rest of Europe. So remember, this is 1772. London is one of the bigger powers during this time. United States is kind of just starting out and growing from this time. So in the mid 1760s, the British Empire, yes, the British Empire, the biggest political power at this time, or economic, you know what I mean, had accumulated an enormous amount of wealth through its colonial possessions and trade. Yes, believe it or not, they did. I'm going to say it's probably not mostly through trade. It's probably mostly through their colonial possessions. Not going to lie, the British Empire kind of, colonialized a lot of the early world. So yeah, I'm sure that's where most of their possessions came from. Either way, they have accumulated a more enormous amount of wealth through who knows what. Some people will have their own opinions, but you see it in history. Anyway, this created an aura of over-optimism and a period of rapid credit expansion by many British banks. The hype came to an abrupt end in June 8th of 1772 when Alexander Fordyce, I really hope I said his last name right, one of the partners of the British banking house, Neil James Fordyce and Down, so 4 guys here, they all fled to France because Alexander Fordyce had a bunch of debt, and they all escaped London to get away from all this debt, and they went to France. So they ran away. And news quickly spread that this happened and triggered a banking panic in England. as creditors began to form long lines in front of British banks to demand instant cash withdrawals. This crisis quickly spread to Scotland, the Netherlands, and other parts of Europe. And many historians have actually claimed that the economic repercussions of this crisis during this time were actually one of the major contributing factors to the Boston Tea Party protests and the American Revolution. So crazy. One guy started this because he didn't want to pay off of his debt and just completely collapsed the banking system in Europe and inadvertently started protests for the Boston Tea Party protests and the American Revolution. Thank you, good sir. Good job, running away from your debts. I'm just kidding. I'm not condoning. Don't run away from your debts. Please pay them off. We don't want this to happen again. So that was the first one we got here. The second one we see in pretty recent history is one a lot of us know about, especially if you're listening in America, you know about this one. Because, this happened all over the world, but it also, it majorly was impacted on the U.S. government. So the Great Depression of 1929 to 1939. So 10 years. I actually have a first-hand experience, not in myself, but, I guess it's like a third-hand experience, because my dad would tell me about his mom. So my grandma lived during this time, and she ended up picking up a lot of habits that a lot of people started picking up after this had happened, which was they would start hoarding a lot of items and food and like beans. I don't know why I said specifically beans. Yes, they hoarded beans. They hoarded a lot of canned goods, and they had a lot of food and jars and stuff like that. They had to hoard this. They hoarded it after the fact because they were scared that it was going to happen again. So they always were prepared after that fact. But luckily for the next 50-ish years, actually longer than that, for America, there was never, almost a good 80 years, there was not another economic disaster as big as the Great Depression, or that can even be considered a pretty big economic problem. So, the Great Depression. This was one of the worst financial and economic disasters of the 20th century. And many people will believe that the Great Depression was actually triggered by the Wall Street crash of 1929 and later exacerbated by the poor policy decisions of the U.S. government. I'm not completely sure what the poor policy decisions that happened with the U.S. government, but I'm sure you can imagine, because it's the U.S. government, and that happens. Sometimes poor policies just go through, and that's just how it is. The Depression lasted about 10 years, almost 10 years, and resulted in a massive, massive, massive loss of income, record unemployment rates, and output loss, especially in industrialized nations. In the United States, the unemployment rate hit almost 25%. 25% of the whole United States was, out of commission. I remember I remember hearing and learning this in history, and I'm sure you do too. A lot of people were having some financial problems during this time period, and America was kind of a mess in this time period because of the Great Depression. But a lot of Americans banded together during this time and helped each other out, which is really cool. I actually talked about this in one of my previous episodes about kind of how America's been divided, but like when stuff like this happens, we come together and help each other out, and I think that's one of the beauties of America. I talk about this in I think it's episode 3. I could be wrong. This is episode 7. There's so many episodes now, I can't keep track. But episode 3, The Divide, go check it out if you want to hear kind of about how America has, been divided on some things. But they do come together for stuff like the Great Depression and other things as well. Go listen to the episode and you'll find out. Anyway, so yes, like I said, the unemployment rate hit about 25%, at the peak of the crisis in 1933. So about 4 years into this, they hit the peak, and that was the worst of it. Hit 25%. I'm not exactly sure if I don't think we've ever hit that high ever, but during the coronavirus here, we are seeing some pretty high unemployment rates. I'm not sure what those numbers are right now, but I know they're pretty high right now. Thirdly, so this is the third one I'm going to talk about today, is the OPEC oil price shock of 1973. So you're probably wondering, you're like, what in the world is the OPEC? The OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, primarily consisting of Arab nations. So this crisis happened I guess it happened everywhere, but mostly was impacted in some of those Arab nations over there and this also affected the United States because the Arab nations decided to retaliate against the United States in response to its sending arms supplies to Israel during the Fourth Arab-Israel War. So you're probably wondering, what in the world is the Fourth Arab-Israel War? So in the 1900s, there was 6. I could be wrong. I can't remember if the first one started in the 1900s or in the 1800s. But in there were 6 of these Arab-Israeli wars, right? The one that happened during this time period, 1973, like I said, was the 4th one that happened during this time. So let's hear about kind of what was this Arab-Israeli war. So I read this on Britannica. It's Encyclopedia Britannica. It said the sporadic fighting that followed the 6-day war. So this war actually only lasted 6 days, by the way. It developed into a full-scale war again in 1973. On October 6th, the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, this was called the Yom Kippur War, Israel was attacked by Egypt along with the Suez Canal and by Syria on the Golan Heights. The Arab armies showed greater aggressiveness and fighting ability than in previous wars, and the Israeli forces suffered heavy casualties. The Israel army, however, reversed early losses and pushed its way into Syrian territory and encircled the Egyptian Third Army by crossing the Suez Canal and establishing forces on its west bank. Israel and Egypt signed a ceasefire agreement in November and peace agreements on January 18th, 1974. The accords provided for Israeli withdrawal into the Sinai west of the Mittala and Gidai passes. I'm totally saying these horribly because I cannot pronounce words for the life of me. But while Egypt was able to reduce the size of its forces on the east bank of the canal, a UN peacekeeping force was established between the two armies. This agreement was supplemented by another signed on September 4th, 1975. On May 31st, 1974, I know there's a lot of dates, I don't mean to confuse you, Israel and Syria signed a ceasefire agreement that also covered separation of their forces by a UN buffer zone and exchange of prisoners of war. So they kind of made up for this. It lasted about 2 years here. And yeah, so that's why the Arab nations decided to retaliate against the United Nations, which caused the oil price shock of 1973. So like I was saying before we learned about the Arab-Israeli War, the OPEC countries declared an oil embargo, abruptly halting oil exports to the United States and its allies. This caused major oil shortages and severe spike in oil prices and led to an economic crisis in the U.S. and many other developed countries. What was unique about this ensuing crisis was the simultaneous occurrence of very high inflation triggered by spike in energy prices and economic stagnation. As a result, economists named the era a period of stagflation, and it took several years for output to recover inflation to fall to its pre-crisis levels. So this was a tough time for America, I'm sure, because oil, we drive our cars on oil, man. That's how we get around, and everything it spiked during this time. And 1973 was not a good year for oil prices. And it was just pretty unlucky that it ended up occurring in a very high inflation time. So yeah, that's my third economic disaster we're talking about. So what have we talked about so far? Just want to give a little recap just so we're not getting lost. So the first one we talked about, like I said, was the credit crisis of 1772. Remember, London, the guy ran away and it just destroyed Europe. You know what I mean? And also it triggered possible contributing factors to the American Revolution. Secondly, I talked about the Great Depression, and third was the OPC oil price shock of 1973. Right. So we're all on the same page. Good. I hope I'm not talking too fast. The fourth one we're going to talk about today, so we're going to talk about 5 in all, so there's only 2 more, is the Asian crisis of 1997. So this one's pretty recent. The last 2 are pretty recent, in the last 25 years. So the Asian crisis of 1997 was a crisis that originated in Thailand and quickly spread to the rest of East Asia and its trading partners. Speculative capital flows from developed countries to the East Asian economies of Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and South Korea were known as the Asian Tigers. It had triggered an area of optimism that resulted in an overextension of credit and too much debt accumulation in these companies. In July 1997, the Thai government had abandoned its fixed exchange rate against the US dollar that had maintained for so long, citing a lack of foreign currency resources that started a wave of panic across Asian financial markets and quickly led to the widespread reversal of billions of dollars in foreign investment. So everyone was like, whoa, what's going on over here in Thailand? We got to pull up. There's too much problems that are happening and it's just too risky. Let's take our investments out. So like I said, started a wave of panic. Everyone's like, all the foreign investment was like, okay, this is not okay. I don't like this. Getting a little too spooky over here. As the panic unfurled in the markets, I'll be honest, I don't know what unfurled means. I don't know why I wrote that down. In the markets, and investors grew wary of possible bankruptcies of East Asian governments, fears of worldwide financial meltdown began to spread. So everyone was just freaking out because the Asian economics, I can't even speak. The economy in Asia, kind of like in all those countries, everyone was going insane because everyone's like, what's going on? A bunch of bankruptcies of the East Asian governments happened, and it feared of a worldwide financial meltdown. It took years for things to return to normal. The International Monetary Fund had to step in and create bailout packages for the most affected economies to help those countries avoid default. So I've actually been to Thailand, and I was there 3 months ago now, I think it's been 3 months. Very cool country. I definitely suggest going. It's really cool to see. I can't imagine they were going through this in the last 25 years because they were doing pretty good. There's some really nice areas of Thailand. But yeah, so that was the Asian crisis of 1997. For the last one, this one, I'm sure if you're listening to this, I would be very surprised if you're listening to this and you weren't born during this time period, because this was 12 years ago. I'm sure you already know what I'm about to talk about. The financial crisis of 2007-08. So, this sparked the Great Recession, the most severe financial crisis since the Great Depression. So, if you look at it on a scale of the U.S. having some pretty bad economic problems, it would be like it would be the Great Depression and then the financial crisis of 2007-08. I was alive during this time period, and I saw some of the effects that this was having on the United States. Of course, I didn't completely understand what was going on during this time because I wasn't an adult yet. So, yeah. But, so, what's this Great Recession? I'm sure you know what it is if you're listening, but I'll give a quick, little overview of what happened here. And it wreaked havoc in financial markets and around the world, triggered by the collapse of the housing bubble in the US. The crisis resulted in the collapse of the Lehman Brothers, one of the biggest investment banks in the world, and brought many key financial institutions and businesses to the brink of collapse and required government bailouts of unprecedented proportions. It took almost a decade for things to return to normal, wiping away millions of jobs and billions of dollars of income along the way. So like I said, I know people who were actually affected by this. I actually met a guy who owned a bunch of apartments during this time, and he actually his whole apartment complex, he owned I think 5 different apartment complexes, and he went bankrupt because the housing market just collapsed, and he had to kind of figure out something else to do. He was a really nice guy, but it was really unfortunate what happened to him. I can't remember what he does now, but he ended up finding a different, trade, and yeah. In 2019, by the way, we saw record lows of the unemployment numbers. So after this had happened in 2007, 2008, this last year, so it's 2020 now, in 2019, we ended up seeing kind of the lowest it's been since the 08, the Great Recession. So what have we learned today? I hope you have taken away, some knowledge. I hope you didn't know about all 5 of these. I'm sure you didn't. I didn't know about all of these. I've heard about, I think, 4 of them. I didn't know about the credit crisis, actually, of 1772 before doing some, research before this episode. But my question is, what's it going to look like for the world of tomorrow? Because what's happening right now, if I did a whole episode on this, episode 1, pandemic, I talked about some of the biggest pandemics in history. And right now we're going through another one, which is the coronavirus. And people are kind of wondering, what's going to happen to the economy after this? Because it's kind of people are kind of freaked out. And unemployment numbers are going up a lot because, some people can't work. They're not considered essential workers, so they can't go to work. So the government is having to pay a bunch of unemployment checks. They're doing stimulus checks. And on top of that, the United States already has a ridiculous amount of debt. And now we're going into even further debt because we're having to deal with the coronavirus. And it's just super unfortunate. And it'll be really interesting to see after this coronavirus if we're going to have some pretty bad economic problems. I really hope not. I hope it doesn't get as bad as either 08 or especially the Great Depression. I don't think that's going to happen. I've talked to my dad and a couple other family members about this, and they also don't think it's going to get that bad, but they think there's going to be a little economic problem. If you are interested in having a discussion about this, go to rallynetwork.net, and I will post a discussion forum on this episode, and you can kind of talk about this. Do you think there's going to be another economic crisis that happens? Remember, rallynetwork.net, go to the little discussion tab, and there should be a little forum you can talk about this episode. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed hearing about all of these crazy economic disasters that have happened in history. As always, I have a little history fact of the day, or of the episode, I should say, at the end of my episodes. And today, I will be talking about, drumroll please, just kidding, I'm not actually going to put a drumroll effect. So, history fact of the day. Did you know that Christopher Columbus was not the first person to find the United States? In fact, it was someone 500 years before he did. It was a Norse explorer named okay, I'm going to say this wrong because I'm pretty sure it's technically Leif Erikson, but I lived in Duluth, Minnesota for a while in my life, and they talked about we had a park named after him, and they call it Leif Erikson. Some people said Leif Erikson. I'm pretty sure it's Leif Erikson. He was a Norse explorer who landed on the American shores during the 10th century. Erikson could be considered the first European to discover America. I don't know if you knew that. Some people know that, some people don't. I bet they didn't teach you that in your history books, but could be wrong. They might have. But yeah, so kind of a little fun fact. Please go check out my Instagram at The Framework of Tomorrow. So just go to your little Instagram right now and just type in The Framework of Tomorrow, no spaces, and give me a little follow and let me know what you think on some of my posts so far. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to The Framework of Tomorrow. Like I said, I am a part of Rally Network, so go check out rallynetwork.net for some other amazing podcasters. One of my friends on Rally Network is actually Donna Rom. Go check them out. They talk about a lot of different kind of video games, and they're just a really, really cool guys, and I would suggest go checking them out. Donna Rom, Don, and then number 0 Rom. Go check them out, or go to rallynetwork.net and you can find them and many other podcasters. But yes, thank you so much for listening and have a fantastic day.
Rally Podcasting Network. Your favorite podcast rallied into one place.